Okay, we are live. So bear with us, folks, while we get everything set up. Who is going to be joining us tonight, and whoever's in the chat already. So thank you for that. Right, I think we're live there. Right, so we're going to get stuck into this live Q&A. As you know, we're with Andrew Neofytou, and he's a former Sea Harrier pilot, current airline pilot, and owner and founder of Flight Deck Wingman. But Andrew, how have you been since the last time we talked?
Yeah, good. I think the last time we did one of these lives, I was in Kuwait.
Yes.
And things were pretty quiet on the sort of airline flying front. They're picking up, but the worst thing was I couldn't even have a drink while I was in Kuwait. So I'm having a whiskey here this evening, Mike, while we do this chat. But no, things have been good, thank you, mate. And getting busier in the airline world. I'm sure everyone's seen the topical stuff in the news. Flight Deck Wingman is getting busy as well, which is great because it's been a pretty bad time, hasn't it, the last couple of years for everybody. It's easy to forget actually how it's been, but yeah.
So while we're gonna catch up for a bit, but get your questions for Andrew in the comments, and I'm sure he's going to be happy to answer them. But can you just give us maybe a bit of background of your flying career to date, Andrew, just so people can get a gist of where you were and what you've been doing?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, mate. So I've been sort of learning how to fly, I suppose, still learning, always learning since 1992. That's when I did an Air Force flying scholarship. Unfortunately, I wasn't good enough to get into the Air Force. So after university, I joined the Royal Navy. And I was extremely lucky to go down and fly the Sea Harrier. So, maybe there'll be some questions in tonight about the training along the way to get there, how it's changed, how it might not have changed since then in some ways as well. And I served with 801 Naval Fighter Squadron. My time was cut a bit short because I had some operations on my back. So unfortunately for me, that was the end of me flying in ejection seats. But since then, I've been off to the airlines, and I flew for Thomas Cook Airlines for about 10 years. And I've been with my current airline, I can't name them, but a big UK airline for about 7 years now, and I fly the 787. I'm also a Mad Keen glider pilot, which has got a lot of similarities to air combat, actually. And as you kindly mentioned there, Mike, I run Flight Deck Wingman, which helps pilots apply to and pass selection processes for airlines and flight schools. And Sky Chaser, a recruitment company, and a podcast as well for Flying Out Loud. So, yeah, I'm a busy chap, but life is good. Thank you, mate.
Nice one. But yeah, let's talk a bit about your podcast. Where did that actually come about? Because it's absolutely brilliant. Go and check it out. The link's in the description, folks. So go and check it out and subscribe to Andrew. But where did the idea come from, and what's your premise of the whole podcast about?
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Mike, especially from someone who's got such a great following like you. It was a lockdown project, really. I guess I had all these different contacts in this network that I've been lucky enough to build up, and I just wanted to get some stories told. And I guess there's an av geek sort of element to them, but they're more about inspiring and empowering stories around aviation-based themes. So I've been lucky enough to interview Martin Purty, who led the Red Arrows across the Atlantic. Who else have I interviewed that's interesting? Richard Browning, the jet suit man, if you've seen him hovering. So obviously that's and Richard kindly invited me down to Goodwood. I was hoping I might get a go, but things weren't to be that day, so I didn't get a go at trying to hover the jet suit. But yeah, all sorts of people. So the podcast, inspiring, sort of empowering stories. Go and check it out wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks very much for the plug. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. And yeah, all the links are in the description, folks. So go and check out Andrew and subscribe. But as you can see, Andrew, there's a few questions coming in. So if you just start from the top, and guys, get your questions coming in and enjoy.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, mate. So I'll try and keep track of everyone, and I'll do my best to answer everybody's questions. So the first one I can see from, I think someone that posted this to Mike before today's chat. Maverick Buckley, great name. Don't know if that's your real name. What was it like to fly the greatest all-rounder aircraft ever made? Yeah, I suppose it was in its day, actually. It was mega, Maverick. I guess extremely demanding. I'm not one of those pilots that was a natural, I would say, at flying a Sea Harrier or certainly operating it. But it's one of those one of those things that's quite hard to explain to someone because you're doing so much stuff in one go. Flying this aeroplane is incredibly difficult to fly, incredibly powerful aeroplane, and operating it in a single seat environment. So quite hard to explain that to people, what that feels like. I mean, in terms of the raw sort of flying of the aircraft, once you got your head around the V-style regime and the fact that it was so powerful, particularly at low level, it was an absolute blast to fly. A bit like riding a bull, I guess, into a bull ring at times. Real sort of, felt like at any moment it would bite you. But yeah, fantastic. And then the multi-role, obviously predominantly air to air. That was a really fun environment. I loved it. The Sea Harrier close in, all right, it's not going to have a performance of something like of the era F-16s and the like, but very capable platform, excellent radar system, excellent radar missile combo. So we gave a really good account of ourselves in the BVR and BFM occasionally rolls. And then bombing, did a bit of bombing. Can't say I'm a natural bomber, but I did okay at it, and a bit of very limited recce. But fantastic aircraft to fly. Thanks for the question. Jim, another one that came in I think before, said, do you prefer military flying or airline flying? Okay, did I prefer military and do I prefer airline flying? Well, they're not really comparable, Jim. Obviously, you know that. I loved the military flying because it was pure flying aircraft, and let's face it, not that it was a good thing that the Sea Harrier was so demanding to fly, but there'll never be an aeroplane that demanding to fly again. So from my perspective, I loved it because I was getting to fly that type of aircraft. I love the airline flying because I get to go to some amazing places, from South America to the Far East to Canada, you name it, I go there as a long haul pilot, and I get to do some amazing things, stuff that's on people's bucket list to do once in their life. So I love that about airline flying, and I also love the people I work with. Such a really diverse community of people in the airline world, but I do find airline flying a little bit frustrating, I guess. In terms of, you don't actually get to do that much flying for obvious reasons. It's all designed around doing everything super safely. So that's why I took up competition glider flying. So that's what I tend to do on my days off now, and actually quite a lot of similarities between glider flying and air combat back in the day, albeit at much different speeds. So the two aren't comparable. I love both for different reasons. If you asked me to get back in a Sea Harrier, I'm not sure I would, unless you could guarantee me it wasn't going to kill me, and no one could do that. So I don't know, but I'm lucky enough, of course, to have seen both. Thanks for the question. And says, hi, did the Sea Harrier have decent legs, or was it short range? Could you give me an idea? It did have ferry tanks that you could put on it, and I can't remember exactly what the range would have been then. Probably, obviously, it depends on what altitude you're flying and what speed you're flying. You're going to get better legs out of any jet aircraft if you're higher up at sort of econ speeds. But typically we'd fly it with drop tanks, not the ferry tanks, the slightly smaller drop tanks. To give you an idea, probably low level, we're looking at around an hour, flattening around at low level max, absolute max. And then, with a bit of a mix in the air combat regime. Obviously, you're flying at a high power a lot of the time, probably again about an hour. So I think that's probably ballpark about where you'd get. Off the top of my head, it would burn about £1,000 every 10 minutes at low level. It was something like that. And again, if there's any Sea Harrier guys watching, please correct me on the figures, but I think we carried £8,000 of fuel. So you can see it would burn fuel pretty quickly, and you've got to have enough to get back, of course. So not amazing legs, no. Pretty small jet, really. Not that much fuel it could carry. And, of course, when you were carrying fuel in the drop tanks, you couldn't pull as much G as you could when you were off drops, as they call it, so no fuel in the drop tanks. So, it could be limiting, for sure. Right. Got loads of questions coming in. Let's have a look. So what was training like for escape and evasion and combat survival? I think it's changed. I've heard that it's changed. So we used to do a course called, I think it was a 409 course. Again, time is 25 years ago. And it was all about how to survive if you were shot down, and how to escape and evade capture. I remember it being not the most pleasant experience. It was approaching about a 10-day course out somewhere in the New Forest. Mine was in the middle of November. Of course, if you timed it well, you might get to do it in summer. But bloody cold and wet. And once you were cold and wet, that was it. There was, of course, no opportunity to dry your clothes out, etc. We used to walk some pretty significant, or run some significant distances in a day. Very little food, pretty much no food, to be honest with you, for the first week or so. And then at the end of that period, you try to evade capture, but of course you're funneled into being caught and into a 2-day interrogation stuff. Can't talk about exactly what happens within that, but yeah, it was a pretty intense couple of days. It's amazing what your mind does when you've lost so much weight, and I lost nearly 2 stone in that period. So I could probably do that now, to be honest with you. Interesting course for sure. I'm not sure they're doing it in that format anymore. But yeah, I'm glad I did it, and I'm glad I never had to use it, actually, more importantly. Rabbit Squadron says the Pegasus engine must have been a powerful engine. What was the acceleration and climb rate like? So again, obviously, acceleration and climb rate depends on what altitude you're at. So the lower the density altitude and the colder the air and higher the pressure, the more performance you're going to get out of the engine. But it was phenomenal. In fact, that the first time I flew in a Harrier was obviously a T8 Harrier, a 2-seater, and that was brutal acceleration. And then I remember all the instructors and senior guys on the ACU saying when you did your first solo, which came trip 3, so you did two flights in a T8, and then your first solo was the 3rd flight you ever had in a Harrier, which is insane thinking about it. And I remember the guys saying it's going to accelerate pretty quickly. So obviously, fine. They said, just brace yourself for it. And there's always a bit of a lag with any jet engine. You put the power on, nothing happens, then it bites. You can't explain it to somebody. It's like the fastest roller coaster you've ever been on, but it just keeps going, and it would keep going like that at least to a couple of 100 knots, 200-300 knots probably. It was phenomenal at low level. Someone did tell me it would out-accelerate an F-18 at low level. I'm not sure if that's true or not. I've never tried it, but it was, brutal acceleration. 0 to 100 in about 4 seconds. And then, obviously, got that much power, it'll climb really, really quickly. But it doesn't have reheat. So at altitude, or if you were low energy, at altitude, trying to regain energy, trying to accelerate away, climb, it would struggle a little bit. But what we didn't have in that sort of power or ability to regain energy at altitude, we could gain back in flying really small radius turns. And for those of you that know anything about air combat, there are rate fights and radius fights. They're both flying around circles in the air, but a rate fight, you go around a circle quicker. A radius fight, you obviously fly a smaller radius. And some the other aircraft you might be fighting could be in a radius or a rate fight with you, and you'd have to decide what was going to work best for you. So usually once you've lost your energy, very difficult to get it back unless you start flying downhill, and if there's nowhere to go downhill because you're running out of altitude, all you can do is radius fight, but it would fly really small circles. You could use a little bit of VIF as well. Going off track a little bit here, but so hopefully that answers that question. David Smith says, what were some of the weather limits for landing a Harrier on the boat? Any bad weather stories? I can't recall the exact weather limits. I wasn't night deck qualified. They qualified, and it could be pretty challenging. The ship had a habit of parking itself where the weather wasn't ideal. It was just sod's law. But we'd fly essentially like an ILS, using what they call MAJ on the ship to the carrier. And I do remember being out not very far away from the boat, probably inside of a mile away, still not able to see the ship properly. And of course, you can see where it should be in the head-up display. And there's a little sort of hockey stick thing that would wind itself down to where it actually gave indications of when to use a bit of nozzle to enter the hover. So it would show you where the hover stop was in the head-up display when you should take the hover stop and perhaps needing braking stop as well. And I remember all of a sudden the ship appearing more clearly. And of course, the next thing you've got to do is to be very careful not to, I guess, get a bit scared and pull back, because if you do that as you're in the sort of V-star regime, you'll over alpha the wing, and the Sea Harriers all Harriers had a really nasty reputation if you over alphaed them, particularly near V-star flight. So hope that answers that one. Did the Royal Air Force and Royal Navy Harriers have similar performance regarding speed and range? So obviously some Royal Navy pilots did go and fly the GR9. So I think you talked about GR9 versus a Sea Harrier. I didn't fly the GR9, so I quite honestly can't answer that question. However, I do know that the GR9 had a bigger engine, was made out of composite, had a bigger wing, bigger flaps, bigger tanks. So I would imagine that it outperformed the Sea Harrier by quite some margin in terms of range, etc. Speed-wise, not sure. Probably broadly similar. Neither of them were supersonic. Probably broadly similar in terms of speed. But I guess we'll have to ask a GR9 pilot. Maybe there's one tuned in. Hackett Engman says, what should the Argentinians who were shot down during the Falklands conflict have done to survive in general? Could speed have had anything to do with it? Before my time, I think I was 7 when the Falklands conflict happened. There are far greater, and I'll preface all of this by saying, far greater, better, more experienced Sea Harrier pilots than me out there. But the answer is I don't know what they could have done differently or better, to be honest with you. I think at that time they were just outclassed by the jet, by the Sidewinder, and by the pilots. I guess they'd never been in that type of environment before. And what I do know is, I might be biased here, but Sea Harrier pilots, I think, are the best pilots in the world. And I don't know. I guess a whole bunch of things. I'm sure that Mike at some point will maybe have the opportunity to interview someone who knows a lot more about flying in the Falklands conflict than me. But a great question. What would you say were the big technology changes in your career that required you to have to adapt and learn the most? I think going from the Hawk T Mark 1, as it was when I went through advanced flying training and tactical weapons training at RAF Valley, that jet didn't have a head-up display. Had something that looked like one, but it wasn't. It was just a very primitive sort of gun and bombing sight. And then stepping into the cockpit of a Sea Harrier, albeit we weren't using all of the tech initially, but that cockpit was quite a place to be. Some familiar stuff, both BA aircraft, but certainly getting into the Sea Harrier, bigger jet, a lot more going on in the cockpit, head-up display, multifunction displays, radar displays, and, bearing in mind, as I said, 2 T8 flights. I think it was a 2 sim flights, then your first solo. There's a lot going on, and single pilot cockpit, no one to sort of help you. So I think that jump from the T Mark 1 to the Sea Harrier, using the head-up display and then moving fairly swiftly into radar work, was a big jump up. And the tech was sort of second generation, I guess, radar tech. It was good. It was very good, and it was pretty. I'm not going to say easy to use, intuitive, but a lot going on in that cockpit. So I think probably that jump from the T Mark 1 Hawk to the Sea Harrier. Okay, MKMD says, I'm assuming the undercarriage of the Shah was rugged and robust for carrier landing. Any of my landings, mate, to be honest with you, had to be robust for. Were they prone to getting damaged much, especially in rough seas? A main wheel nose gear, pretty nails, to be honest, on the Sea Harrier. The undercarriage that wasn't, the gear that wasn't, were the wingtip outrigger wheels. They're pretty feeble, really, if you had any sideways movement on at all. And it was really obvious if somebody had any sideways movement on, particularly as they VL'd, vertical landing, to either the deck or ashore. And if you did have any sideways movement on, you could very easily break one of those outrigger wheels. Rough seas. The thing about flying in rougher seas, and it doesn't need to be a lot of movement on the deck for it to look like a lot when you're in the cockpit, was as you came alongside the ship's, of course, pitching up and down, rolling, listing, all that sort of stuff. And you've got to try and not follow the ship's movement. So if you think about hovering on land, what we would do is have two, usually at Yeovilton anyway, but anywhere else, you pick out some references, ideally a couple of references you could line up out on one side, right or left of the cockpit, and again in front of you. And you'd be constantly, if you look at anyone, helicopter pilots, Harrier pilots, constantly moving their head like this, looking at the references. Those references don't move; they're stable. Therefore, you can follow those references exactly, and then do your thing, stay on the references. When the ship's moving, you want to follow the references because you imagine them to be steady references, but of course they're not, they're moving. And then what tends to happen is you end up moving with a ship, but not quite exactly the same time, as you sort of get out of phase with the ship. So what you had to try to do was to ignore that movement and average it out. It's a bit like flying in formation. If you're, number 3 or 4 of an echelon formation, and this is what the red arrows do so well, you've got to try and ignore all the other aircraft moving around, just look at the leader. And likewise, moving across the deck, you've got to try and ignore what the ship's doing, and average out those movements and just stay on the references, but forget that the references are moving, if that makes sense. I hope that answers that question. Again, a little bit off patter. If you could choose between the Sea Harrier and, say, the Super Hornet, Tomcat, Viking, or another aircraft that lands on a carrier catching a wire, which one? Ooh, good question. I think it's got to be the Tomcat, isn't it? I mean, that was just, what a time that was. Massive jet. I remember being at the end of my officer training at Britannia Royal Naval College and having the opportunity to go out to the US and to spend a couple of days at Norfolk, going on, I think we went on the Eisenhower, and having a look at where over to Oceania, and it was at a time where actually the F-18s were pretty new, and there were still all the Tomcats there, and I was just blown away, of course, because this was like, only 10, 12 years on from when Top Gun 1 came out. So I mean, it was so cool. So I think getting in a Tomcat. I've chatted to, in fact, on the For Flying Out Loud podcast that Mike's kindly put up there, chatted to a friend of mine who flew the GR9 and flew the F-18, and the episode's called Top Gun, so go and have a listen to that on For Flying Out Loud, and you get to hear a little bit about what it was like for him to fly the GR9 and of course cat and trap ops on the F-18. Ryan says, what's your opinion on microlight flying? Gee, I've never been in a microlight, Ryan. I've done pretty much every other type of aviation. I've been at hang gliding, balloon flying, not been in a microlight. I like anything to do with aviation, to be honest with you. So going and flying in any sort of GA stuff is still good fun. Still got that passion for flying. So, yeah, good on you if you're a microlight pilot. Why not? Enjoy it. Jack Richardson says, as a former military pilot who now flies commercially, what's your take on supersonic passenger aircraft? I guess it's coming. I mean, it just, bearing in mind how far we are now. From when Concorde was conceived, entered service, and then left service. God, it must be at least 15 years, since it's left service. It just blows you away on how advanced and what a massive achievement that was. I think probably the cost risk versus reward element is likely to make that a pretty remote opportunity, I would suggest. Having said that, as technology moves on, and there's aircraft out there called wave riders, they ride the shock waves of that are created as the aircraft gets near that part of the flight regime, and they use those shock waves to push themselves forward, and they go hypersonic. Then I don't think it'd be supersonic; they'd be hypersonic and stupid altitude. So it might happen, but to have something that can carry, as a 787 is that I fly, with some nice cabins as well. We've still got around 230 people on the aircraft. We can fly a long way, a long time. It's probably a way off beating that, to be honest with you. Hakan Engman says, was the decision to go for the F-35B the correct decision for Britain compared to the F-35C, especially with regards to range, internal fuel, tanker availability, etc.? I think that came down to the size of the carriers, really. And I know there's a lot of to and froing going on between, whether it should be a CVS carrier, versus what we've got now. And a friend of mine, again, that I've interviewed on the for Flying Out Loud podcast, Nath Gray, was the first to land on board HMS Queen Elizabeth in an F-35B. He was one of the lead test pilots. He really rated both aircraft. He got to fly all types, but he did say the F-35C was his favourite. So maybe that answers that question. Wish I'd have a go at flying it, actually. Incredible aircraft. Still got lots of mates that are flying the F-35 now. So lucky them. Hello, did you enjoy air-to-air refueling in a Harrier? Was it hard for you? Everything was hard for me, my friend. But yeah, I did. And yeah, it's really interesting. We did get to have a go at air-to-air refueling in a T8 for the first time. But then it's time to go and do it on your own. And yeah, it's mad really, isn't it? Because this basket's probably, only what the diameter is, 24 inches or something at the most across. And yeah, and getting underneath that basket and trying to plug in. One of the hardest things about air-to-air refueling is just not looking at the basket, which might sound odd. Even if you see it at the corner of your eye, just ignore the basket. Back when I was doing air-to-air refueling, in terms of British tankers, it was the VC-10 and the TriStars. The VC-10 was actually reasonably easy to air-to-air refuel from. Well, certainly as I saw it, we could put one of the pitch bars in the head-up display through one of the pods that the refueling beam came out of, the pipe came out of, and just drive in on that reference, like formation flying. And yeah, sure enough, a few seconds later you feel a satisfying kadunk, at which point you could look at it and yeah, the probe was in the basket. The TriStar, on the other hand, was very different. It did have black and white sort of tram lines painted underneath the belly that you'd use to line up as references, but those references were not quite as easy to follow, I guess. So tanking off the TriStar was a little bit trickier. And of course, as the basket gets closer to the jet, you start to get some of the sort of local aerodynamic effects, and that tends to move the basket a bit. So yeah, I actually really enjoyed air-to-air refueling in the end. One of the hardest things there is all your mates are watching, so if you're plugging in and you need to do it, you either got to get onto another task or you're transiting somewhere, and if you don't plug, you've got to divert, the whole formation diverts. That's a real pain in the balls. So yeah, it's the pressure of your mates really, probably more than anything. We all know the Harrier is a brilliant aeroplane. What is your favourite thing about it? What's my favourite thing about the Harrier? Wow, quite a lot. I'd probably say the acceleration and just, yeah, they called it the pilots called it the bumper fun jet. And it sort of was really, especially in the V-style regime. I mean, until then, there weren't any aircraft that, hovered and transitioned in and out of hovering flight. So one of the things I loved was just doing circuits. They've got that brutal acceleration, punch the nozzles down a little bit, stow, short takeoff with the nozzles, and then just pitch the aeroplane up to contain the speed and the energy. Probably around about 300 feet, you'd have to roll to 120 degrees angle of bank to level out at 1,000 feet because I had that much inertia going up in the circuit, and to come back round and enter the hover, spin around, brake and stop hover, which is a sort of the bow type thing that you'd be familiar with. That B-style stuff, just absolutely mega. So that and the acceleration, I think. How safe is flying gliders relative to light aircraft and microlights? I don't mind chatting about that. So it's a permanent emergency, obviously, with a glider because you don't have an engine. That said, the glider that I am getting, and one that I previously owned, have a small little self-sustaining motor. But you do have to fly them assuming that self-sustaining motor is not going to work. So in terms of safety, anything's as safe as you make it. Usually, if an incident or an accident happens, it's started quite a few steps back, and then something happens, and another thing happens, and another thing happens, and all these little holes in the Swiss cheese model that I'm sure you're familiar with, people talk about, will line up, and something goes wrong. Certainly, if you've got to be very mindful of what's happening meteorologically and with terrain, and always have an option. And in the case of a glider, that's going to be a field to land in. It's not entirely safe, but then the engine stops at a microlight. You've not got as many options. Most people that come gliding with me are usually within a minute of being airborne have forgotten that we don't have an engine. Especially on a good day, you just forget, and you're coming down so slowly. So go and give it a go. Check out the British Gliding Association. I fly out of Lasham Gliding Society, so you can go and check them out as well. Get yourself a trial lesson. Give it a go. Do all the Harrier have a gun pod? Obviously they could fit either gun pods or other stuff. We typically had what were called I forgot the name of them now. Aquipods, forgotten it. Anyway, it was the pods that would use our that we would use for AMRAAM, simulating AMRAAM firing. But they could all the Sea Harriers could be fitted with twin gun pods, and I was absolutely useless at strafing. But yes, it could be firing, and it's just really cool fun firing the cannon. How do you rate the 787 to fly compared to other types? Thanks, Jack. I've flown most of the old school Boeings, smaller ones, so 757, 767, and the 787. And I've flown the Airbus A320, 321, and 330. So I've sort of done a fair bit of that sort of small to big jet type stuff. And the 787 is what I'd probably say is the best blend of Boeing and Airbus tech together. I think it's an absolute delight to fly. It's got a head-up display, which of course is familiar to me, which makes accurate flying really, really easy. The tech within a 787 would blow your mind, to be honest with you. It's a really amazing jet, and the way that it feels to fly, you wouldn't know that it was different to any other traditional aircraft, but it's doing a lot of clever tech that makes it feel really easy to fly. So I think it's a great jet. Love it. Timber says, do you attend Red Flag or other? Can you speak on any interesting missions? Perhaps a good kill on someone and maneuver in training combat that became hairy or, again, interesting. I didn't attend Red Flag. An awesome, obviously awesome collection there for multinational aircraft. But in terms of interesting air combat stories, I think, and I chatted to Mike when we did our live down at, our recorded session down at Boscombe Down about my probably first day on the front line, because it's just something that stands out. There's so many firsts that you have in aviation, but some of them stand out more than others, and this one really did for me. We were me and a mate of mine called Judge, 2 Sea Harriers, out of an airfield in Poland to go and obviously for exercise, find and then shoot down some Su-22 fitters. So it was cold winter sort of time. The terrain looked very Eastern European, which is obviously topical with the awful events over there in Ukraine at the moment. But it felt like we were in a Cold War sort of environment. and the Freddie, the fighter controller, was in a sort of a bunker somewhere way away from where the airfield was that we'd taken off from, and obviously getting their head around all of the tech that was in this bunker as well, and vectoring us in on these 4 Su-22 fitters at low level over Poland. And these 4 jets came towards us. We did what we call sorted them, which means that both me and my wingman agreed who was going to shoot down which jets in this 4 shipping card formation. So 2 at the front, 2 behind, heading straight towards us. He sorted the lead pair, I sorted the trail pair, shot them down with AMRAAM missiles quite a way away, and then merged. 2 of them cleared out. That was the rules that we'd agreed, and then we merged with the other 2 and easy sidewinder shots of them. So that was pretty cool. Again, on that deck, one of my not so fine moments, losing a bit of SA in a merge with a MiG-29, 2 Sea Harriers against 1 MiG-29. Of course, in ACM, BFM type stuff with a MiG-29 versus Sea Harrier, we're outclassed in terms of the manoeuvrability of the aircraft. And I just remember my wingman saying scrabble brake right, and as I instinctively knew where this jet might be, and as I looked round, all I could see was this big ball of vapour with 2 orange carrot afterburners sticking out the back of it. And I did brake right. I pulled. In fact, I pulled so hard that the jet departed. But I think I avoided being shot down. So better to be lucky than good, isn't it? There's obviously probably loads more I could think about, but they were probably some of the most standout ones. So can you feel a general difference in regards to flying skills as well as the personal attitude and vibe in a cockpit when flying with former military pilots compared to pure civilian pilots? I'd say every pilot's different, to be honest with you. Quite honestly, I've flown with some exceptional non-military pilots, and I've no idea how good or otherwise they'd be flying a fast jet, but they've been superb operators of these big jets and very good hands-on pilots in flying them. Historically, and probably still banter-wise, most civilian pilots will think military pilots are perhaps going to be a bit awkward. Fast jet pilots even more so. Harrier pilots probably the worst of the bunch. It's not something I go to work and talk about, and I don't. Even if I do fly with military pilots, very rarely actually do you notice a difference. You do, of course, notice a difference if one pilot's not operating as well as another, but that could happen at any stage. So no. I think if there's a military pilot in the cockpit, obviously you can spin some dits, tell some stories. But no, I really enjoy flying with lots of different people now. It's one of the things that I actually like about airline flying is you get to fly with lots of different people all the time. Right, excuse me, Adam, let's read yours. Adam says, do you think the rotary wing training RAF Harrier pilots received in the early days had any real value? Well, Air Force and Royal Navy, Adam, if I could pick up on that. But we had a 5-hour, I'll say that was a course footprint, hovering course at RAF Shawbury in between finishing tap weapons on a Hawk and going to the Sea Harrier. And it was to not teach us how to fly a helicopter, it was to teach us how to hover, but in a way that no helicopter pilot does that often anyway. And that was not if they're just going to hover normally to land. We were learning how to hover between 75 and 90 feet above the ground, which is what we did in the Sea Harrier. And the reason for that was to give us an ejection option if the engine went bang. So, hovering at this higher altitude, that's what it was for. Actually, on the first flight, again, I was with Nath Gray, the F-35 test pilot I was talking about before. We went through our training together. And on the first flight, both me and Nath sort of seemed to get it sorted out, to be honest with you, and hovered taxied in, much to the surprise, I think, some of the students on the course who thought it was going to take a little bit longer to do that. I loved it, the helicopter flying. I didn't take as naturally to flying the Harrier, believe it or not, because it was a bit scary, quite honestly, initially at least. Latterly, I became much more confident in it. I think the rotary flying definitely did help. I think without it, you'd probably be struggling, because the Harrier, couldn't sit in there in a hover for forever. Not only would you run out of fuel very quickly, but the reaction control valves, the RCVs on the wingtips and the nose and the tail boom, they could get really, well, it would get really hot, and there was a danger of them seizing and not moving, which would be really bad. So yeah, it was really good to do that hovering course first. Thanks for all these questions, everybody. Your body is 75% and I'm thirsty. That's an interesting name. Is having a personal plane and a pilot's license for recreative use realistic with a doctor's salary? I mean, I don't know what doctors earn these days, but if you're looking at powered aircraft, and someone was mentioning microlights earlier, they could be very affordable. You can get into a glider for the price of a small car. So I would say on a doctor's salary, that's eminently achievable. If you want to figure out if you've got an aptitude for flying and you want to figure out if you enjoy it, go and try gliding, because it's the most inexpensive form of flying, and it's also probably the most fun flying I've ever done, weirdly, when we're talking about flying a Harrier. Did the Sea Harrier had hotspots on the hood? Was it useful to find targets and ground air? Not sure entirely what I mean by hotspots, but I think, are you talking about, perhaps you can add me a little bit more detail. It's for Gaz HPL. I think you're asking about how we found targets, which was predominantly, of course, with the radar. If you could expand on that a little bit for me, my friend, I'll be happy to try and answer that for you. The Freckle Peony, would the Sea Harrier have been much better with a GR579 tight wing as originally planned? Yeah, I mean, bigger wing is obviously better, but I'm not sure that the engine would have needed uprating, which made a bigger fuselage, etc., which essentially is what happened as it transitioned from first generation Harrier to second generation Harrier. So I'm sure it would have been, who isn't going to want a bigger wing, more missiles, more fuel? But yeah, I mean, essentially that's what happened with the GR9. Bigger wing, needed a bigger engine, quite a bigger fuselage. Hey presto. And of course, as materials move on as well, so composite materials and stuff, that helps make things stronger and lighter. And of course, hovering, the jet needs to be as light as possible. What was your trickiest opponent in dissimilar air combat in a Sea Harrier? One standout moment again, which again I spoke to Mike about, was probably an F-15C, so a single seat F-15, and these jets, they're old tech now compared to something like the F-35, but they're such big jets, they don't even look like they're flying normally. You normally see an aircraft and you can see the sort of radius that it's flying around. But with things like the F-15, I just remember it almost looking like it was turning on the spot. Big weapon load, big fuel state. So I remember that, a lot of it comes down to the pilot as well. I remember being 2v1 against this F-15 and being blown away actually by how the pilot operated that jet and how it was flown. El Limazili says, hi Andrew, were the Sea Harrier's controls well harmonised in pitch and roll, and why join the Royal Navy over the Royal Air Force? I'll take the last one first to get out of the way, because I didn't manage to get into the Royal Air Force. I don't know why. Apparently you had to be very good looking to get into the Royal Air Force. Were the Sea Harrier controls harmonised in pitch and roll? It's a difficult question, that. Harmonised. Nothing felt particularly harmonised in a Sea Harrier. And of course, as you transition between wing-borne flight and jet-borne flight, all sorts of weird things started happening. It was a nice jet to fly. And yeah, it did. I guess it did feel in conventional flight, it was a nice jet to fly. Had a couple of advices. You couldn't keep doing aileron rolls. I think if you did 2 of them, the jet might depart because you got a yaw induced from the roll, and that could quickly take it from control flight. But yeah, it was a nice aeroplane to fly, and I guess it was well harmonised. But probably ask a test pilot. I guess they'll have a better idea. Do you do any display flying? Not officially, but no, I didn't. But I have flown in and out of displays. But there were some. In fact, I remember the Sea Harriers winning best display at the Royal International Air Tattoo about 20 years ago. It was Lieutenant Commander Rob Schwab and I think Will Hynett, but I might have that wrong, an Air Force exchange pilot doing a pairs Sea Harrier display, and it was absolutely incredible to watch. Of course, knowing what the jet was like to fly and to see the guys doing what they were doing blew my mind. So I don't think anything's been done like that before. For those of you that might have seen it, two Sea Harriers facing each other, pirouetting around each other, and all the other stuff they did. That was an incredible display. Tomcats Forever. God, so many questions. I might try and speed up a bit. Did you have any emergency SOS, says James? Yeah, in fact, on my desk here, so over here, so this blade, that's an HP1, so first stage compressor blade from a Pegasus aircraft. I don't know if it'll show up on the camera. Probably tell me if it does. There's a little dink here, just on the leading edge of it. On one particular day, I was flying back from RAF Wittering to Yeovilton at 24,000 feet, and one of these blades essentially sheared off for some reason. And this being a first stage, that piece of blade then went through the rest of the engine and took out all of the rest of the stages behind it. And there were another 7 stages of the compressor behind it. Most of those stages looked like a piece of blue tack that you'd pulled, torn, and the end had flopped over. The whole of the 7th and the 8th stage compressor were gone entirely. All the blades totally demolished. I went 15,000 feet with no engine, IMC, so in cloud, with my wingman somewhere behind me, doing a great job in supporting me. And I, from 24,000 feet to 9,000 feet in a sledge ride, took only a couple of minutes, and multiple relight attempts. Busy bit of airspace with airliners all around. And fortunately for me, after what was probably 6 or 7 relight attempts, because every time I tried to restart it, it would surge again. So I'd have to shut it down, try again. Fortunately, at some point, it started to relight normally, albeit a huge amount of vibration, which made it very difficult to read any of the instruments, including the head-up display. Very noisy and not producing much power. I could get to about 69% power maximum. I thought any more than that, it's going to stop again. That in itself wasn't an issue flying around, despite the vibration and the noise, but landing the Harrier required more power than that. So I ended up in a regime where there was no prescribed way to land the aircraft with that amount of power. And you don't want to be moving the throttle when you've got an engine problem like that. So, and it also meant it was very difficult to slow down. So I had a quick sort of guess at vectoring and forward flight, which I hadn't yet been taught how to do, to try and deflect some of the downwards and backwards so I could slow down and manage to land the jet at RAF Wittering. And when I landed and I closed the throttle and put the nozzles forward to the power nozzle braking position, put the power up to essentially reverse thrust, PNB it's called, the engine seized, big fireball, went through my own fireball. So that was one. Another one, should have sent Mike a picture actually. If you go and look on my Instagram, just look for Flight Deck Wingman, 3 separate words on Instagram, scroll somewhere to the bottom, you'll find a picture of a Harrier canopy on the penultimate flight of the OCU. So only a few months after that engine failure, at 30,000 feet and about 0.9 Mach, huge explosion as I was busted up to catch up with my wingman, and the canopy had had some sort of fatigue failure, shattered, went down the engine, momentarily surged the engine, and I was open cockpit, explosive decompression at 30,000 feet. So that was an interesting day out. Managed to recover that jet to RAF St Athan. But all that happened in a space of 12 months. So it's quite a lot, actually. That jet could certainly find new ways to surprise you. So there you go. That's all the dits I've got. Would you like to try the F-35B, or is it not exciting anymore? Because the jet does most of the work. It's just a different type of exciting, I guess. It's a different type of operating. It's a bit like going from fast jets to fly my glider. You know, it's just a different type of aviation. I would love to have a go in an F-35 because I just want to see how different it is, to be honest with you. Obviously going to be a completely different way of operating. But again, chatting to Nate, the test pilot guy, he loved it, and I'm sure I would too. So Brock says, thank you for doing this, Andrew. You're welcome, mate. Have you ever got to fly with any US Marine Corps Harrier pilots? Any big differences between the British and the Marine Corps Harriers? Yes, I did actually. So quite a few US exchange pilots coming through when I was both on the OCU and on the front line. And I was lucky enough to serve on the front line with a guy called Critter, who's a US Marine Corps Aviate-B pilot on exchange on a Sea Harrier. One of the nicest guys I've ever met, a hugely capable pilot. And he was just a great guy, really, really well respected, rightfully so as well. Any differences between the Harriers? Again, I haven't flown them both. Some of my mates were lucky enough to go and fly the AV-8B. Critter, the US Marine Corps guy, I think he thought that some of the AV-8B had a bigger wing, bigger jet, a bit like a GR, but with a radar. And I think he enjoyed that. But we were flying the AMRAAM, which made a big difference. David Smith says, without going into classified details, how good was the Blue Vixen radar with respect to ECCM overcoming jamming, NCTR, ID and BVR targets? I don't know these days how the tech's moved on, but obviously I can't discuss any like specific details. It was pretty good, is all I'm going to say. Every jet would have slightly better or worse radar picture than other jets. One of the really good things about it was that it had a very low power output, and we also had a thing called track while scan, so we could actually track targets while scanning for other targets. And in the first generation radars, they couldn't do that. Once they picked up a contact, they had to track that contact solely, which meant as they did that, it put more radar energy towards the target they were tracking. So of course that target then knew they were being tracked, and it meant that the pilot that was tracking the other aircraft now couldn't look for any other aircraft, so they're then sort of blind on what else is going on. So from that perspective, it was very good. It could fire the AMRAAM missile, obviously, which is a very capable missile with its own radar as well. So at some point that would have its own radar and going. The probability of kill PK was, very good. But yeah, that's probably as much as I can say publicly about it. Not to get in any trouble, but it was a very good. In terms of overcoming jamming and stuff, yeah, I don't recall it being massively affected by that. But of course, it's not just the radar. It's the radar missile combo. It's the tactics that make a difference. And I think we had, great combo and a great tactics. Dominic says, for its size, do you think the Harrier packs the largest punch? Yeah, I really do, actually. I'm been 2 V4 F-15Es, standard approaching F-15s in wall, as it always seems to do, very aggressive sort of formation. Again, with that radar missile combo. Good night being able to say F-15s on one particular day. I was amazed, actually. I thought, wow, shouldn't be like that. But yeah, we gave it everything we got, but it really was a great little jet. Used to work in the whiskey trade. What are you drinking? I forget. I think it's a Tamanure or something like that. You probably know better than me. It begins with T. What's your call sign? How did you get it? Scrabble is my nickname. I don't know if we call them call signs in the UK, but it's my nickname. And I got it because my surname is Neofytou, spelled Neofytou. It's actually an Air Force guy that gave me that nickname. He said that my name looked like a random load of letters on a Scrabble board. So yeah, Scrabble. So not too embarrassing. The Freckle Peony. God, I'm getting near there's so many questions. So sorry, guys, if I don't get around to all of them. Mike, I don't mind doing an extra 5 minutes or so. What do you think of the Soviet-Russian Harrier rivals, Yak-38's intended replacement? Don't really know anything about them, I'm afraid, my friend. Yeah, I don't know. But Russians do have a habit of building some pretty good jets, don't they? Any memorable moments on board the carrier? Obviously, first deck landings, for sure. Yeah, some things I probably won't talk about. Amusing moments on the carrier, but yeah, I'm just being with with the guys and girls on the ship. That whole ship's company is there really for one reason, and that's to project this power. And there's a real weight of responsibility on you when you're flying off the carrier. And I just really hugely respect everybody on that ship for doing what they did. And I think that's probably the most memorable thing on the carrier, is just how everyone pulled together. Hey, Mike.
Yes, I'm just going to jump in. Yeah, you just mentioned there, because there's so many questions. Are you happy to go on to maybe 10 past or quarter past, Andrew?
Yeah, absolutely. If it helps people, I'll try and pick up speed. It's hard to know how mmany are being added underneath. I'm sorry, guys.
No problem. Enjoy, guys.
Jump back in, Mike, when you want. So about 787. Yeah, cheers, Joe. What's your experience with your experience of carrier aviation? What roles do you think drones will play in this area? I think increasing roles. I forget what they're calling it now. It's not virtual wingman, it's something like that. But we're talking about drones that might look like fighter jets, and maybe smaller drones as well, all working in unison. You can imagine with the new tech that's out there and the data link possibilities, and how a drone might actually be sent off to do the dirty work while you just sit there as a data in a data role. Now, do you remember the year when I was flying over Poland? I'm just seeing something below that. What year would it have been? 2003, I think, off the top of my head. I'd have to look at my logbook. I should have it here, but I don't. I'm sorry. I think it was 2003. Exercise Polish dancer. Pete Harris, Bomber Harris, who did do some stuff in the Falklands War. Where was that question about the Falklands? Pete, you're going to have to answer it now, because I don't know the answer, mate. Absolute legend. Retired Air Vice Marshal, I believe. And I'm not saying anything else nice about him. Where was it? There you go. Pete, someone said, what should the Argentinians who were shot down during the Falklands conflict have done to survive in general? Could speed have been anything to do with it? So, Bomber Harris, can you answer that question, please? That'll teach you for taking a mickey out of me. Tell me I'm looking old. Also a glider pilot, by the way, Pete. Did you ever pass out pulling high Gs? Thank God, no. Actually, one of the things I really loved about G-Force and Air Combat, particularly at Irish Valley, where you could pull a bit more G in a Hawk, was just going into the merge for simulated air combat and going in as fast as you could, pulling as much G as you could, so they call it corner speed, and just seeing where things went from there. So there you go. Tomcats would always knock the spit out of a Sea Harrier, says Pete Harris. I never did any air combat against them, Pete, but we'll never know, will we? Or maybe you do know. Timberwolf, can you recount any fun tales from an evening out with foreign squadrons? Many, I'm sure. I think RIAT always gives rise to amusing things. The detachment to Poland, when we got there, I remember landing, thinking I might not have landed at the right airfield because it was so remote. There was no one there, just a dog running across the runway. And then I arrived and I saw a guy with a Kalashnikov and a Russian style sort of hat, and I thought, I'm definitely here. And then the vodka came out, and then the radar coolant came out. Drinking radar coolant is very bad for you. Don't do it. And I remember being very, very unwell. That was it. I don't have many more memories, obviously. I imagine there's an immense feeling of emotions when you're up there in whatever jet. Yeah, there is. I mean, what it's like to be a pilot, that's one thing. What it's like to fly fast jets is another thing. What it's like to fly fast jets off an aircraft carrier is another thing indeed. And it really was an amazing feeling to get to do that. I'm just looking to see if Pete's He says, I hate predictive text. Can you still answer that question for me, Pete, about what the Argentinians should have done differently? Right, what other questions have we got? Mickey Finn, I remember the Sea Harrier pilots illustrious visiting the Locks plant after a heavy night the night before to clear their heads, allegedly. Yeah, cheers. What's the maximum height a Harrier could vertically take off from ground to maximum height? Don't know, never tried it, to be honest with you. Yeah, no idea. Probably a reasonable amount. It would depend on the density altitude, but I don't know. What's the difference between the Harrier's hover system, the F-35's hover system? Again, not flown the F-35. It has a completely different mechanism, though, from what I understand. It has a lift fan at the front, and it has this movable nozzle at the back. So it's a completely different way of hovering. And as I understand it, and again, Mike, I'm sure you get to interview some F-35 guys if you haven't already, that the mechanics of how you operate that from the cockpit are completely different. So to transition, for example, from wing-borne flight to hovering flight in the Harrier, you would essentially, as you came off the wing, move the nozzles down towards the hover stop and then apply power, and the stick still works in the sort of traditional sense, pitch roll. So you're putting power on as you come into the hover. I believe in the F-35, but again, not flown it, so I might be talking complete rubbish. You close the throttle, and essentially you're telling the jet to do 0 knots, so it just stops going forward. And then to go down, instead of taking power off, because the power's already all the way off, you push forward and it goes down. I believe that's how it works. If anyone says I'm talking rubbish, please feel free to correct me. Have you ever had to complete a dogfight in simulation or real life? Never had to do it in real life. In fact, I think probably the last time that the Sea Harrier did any air combat was a long, long time ago, Falklands time era. And, you know, when I was flying it, we're in the early noughties. So I didn't have to do it for real. I would have liked to have done, despite the risk, of course, just to put the tactics into practice. But no, it didn't happen. Dangerous enough jet as it was, though. Did you get much time to yourself on living on base? Did it feel restricting? No, loads of time. Yeah, so I lived on board. So I bought my first house in Yeovil, and on board the ship, I say on board, that was ashore, and then also on board on HMS Invincible, which is the carrier I was on. Can't say I loved flying living on the carrier, but yeah, it was interesting. Right. Did you like the Hawk? Do you see drones replacing manned fighters? I think we talked about drones. Yes, I do see them playing more of a role. Whether they're totally replaced, don't know. Probably not for a while. Do I like the Hawk? Yes. Fantastic jet to fly. Very capable, lacking a bit of power, but beautiful aircraft to fly, and probably good reason that the Red Arrows still fly it. I hate predictive text scrabble. Yeah. Whatever, looking old. Oh, don't believe you. What else have we got here? Thanks for answering the questions. You're welcome. Thanks for your time and kindness answering the questions. You're welcome. Nick Fazy, React Hangar Party. Yeah, some story in there about the sword that was the prize for best display when the Sea Harrier guys won that display. I'm not saying any more than that, but it was amusing. Won't fuel get over faster when this aircraft does vertical takeoff? Won't fuel get over faster? Don't quite understand that question, I'm afraid, my friend. Last question, Timberwolf. Come on, Pete, to answer the Falklands question. He's there. I can see him at the end. Last question. Can you try to imagine a valid tactical scenario where the Harrier would rise True Lies style hover to fire missiles behind something like an Eagle Wars? No, quite honestly, no. I think firing missiles in a hover would be bad because you'd get that exhaust from the missiles as they left the rails, going down the engine, hot air going into the engine, probably surge the engine, probably crash, probably a very bad idea. So in fact, it was something I had to think about firing a Harrier off. You're in a sort of, if you're trying to get a weapons within weapons parameters to fire something like the AMRAAM, if you got very slow with a nose high and you fired off the rockets, then they could probably do something to the engine. So you'd have to be careful about that. What a great interview. Thanks, David. Appreciate it. Bill says, what's the total aircrew to maintain a Harrier? don't know. I just want to take my hat off genuinely to all of the engineers that looked after those jets, without which I wouldn't have been able to operate them. And the amount of times they, did something to a jet because I'd done something I shouldn't have done in a jet. I really do take my hats off to them. So thanks very much. If there's any gingers listening to this conversation. Hacken says, any bird collisions in the Harrier? No. What about an airliner? Yes. Hit an owl in a flare at night into Larnaca once. That was interesting. Any similarity between rotor flying and the Harrier? Helicopter flying, I guess, the Harrier? Yeah, hovering. But not many other similarities, my friend. Hello, Mike. I'm running out of breath.
Yes, I know you must be knackered now, mate. But we're waiting for Pete because I've interviewed Pete myself. What a top bloke.
Don't tell him that.
I don't tell him that. No. Sorry. Yeah, I take that back.
I first met Pete gliding up at Camp Hill Gliding Club in the Peak District. And, I'm not going to say anything nice about you, Pete. Not now you called me old.
But in case we don't get Pete to answer this question, what you mentioned before, but I want to ask you a question. Have you seen Top Gun 2 yet?
I have indeed. Yeah, first half, you can leave that, to be honest with you. It was a little, I thought, where's this going? Second half, epic. Absolutely, I thought they're both goners.
So what's going to be, what's in the future for you and the podcast and Flight Deck Wingman?
I am well behind on the podcast at the moment, for Flying Out Loud it's called. Please go and check it out. Please leave me a review. Please consider buying me a coffee, actually. Mike probably knows this, but it's not a free process creating all this content, and I'd appreciate it. A lot of effort goes in from Mike and from me in the podcast. I'm a bit behind. I've got loads of cool guests lined up. I just need to get around to interviewing them, and it takes several days to put a podcast script together. So Flight Deck Wingman, continue to help pilots apply to airlines and flight schools around the world. They probably helped 700-800 pilots now in about 35 different airlines. Sky Chaser recruitment, that's been going really well with recruiting pilots. Recently completed a campaign for DEA, an ISR specialist.
Nice.
What else is happening? Can't think. Loads. But thanks very much for letting me plug that, Mike. Appreciate it. So
any teasers for the upcoming guests, or maybe types? You can maybe.
I've got a couple more fast jet people coming on. Who else have I got lined up that's interesting? I'm hoping to get a story from somebody that was formerly living rough on the streets, went on to become a commercial airline pilot for a big UK airline. So I'm all about these sort of inspirational stories.
Amazing.
I'd like to do more on minority pilot groups, wherever they come from, and helping them, because I've been lucky enough to do what I've been able to do. I've not really faced any barriers, from race or gender or anything like that. So I want to try and do a bit more to help people that don't have that opportunity. So I will get on to it, I promise. Here's Pete. So if the Arge had put a missile arm fighters over the Falklands day one, the Sea Harriers would have had a much more difficult job. Yeah, so it goes without any meaningful threat. The Shah's had a turkey shoot. So went back to what I was saying about the winders, and everyone needs to go and watch. When did you interview Peter? It wasn't too long ago, was it?
It was a couple of years ago with Pete, but go and check it out. Type Pete Harris in, aircrew interview.
Pete Harris.
And just go and see that. But as you say, you're looking old Scrabble again.
He says he's still looking old Scrabble, not as old as Pete, fortunately, but
Brilliant.
He's looking than me, and he's got better dits. Genuinely, a lot more better dits, and a lot more of them. So
Well, what a cracking Q&A this has been. So, go and check out Andrew in the description below. Go and subscribe. Go and check him out on Instagram as well and give him a follow. He's got some great content on there. But, Andrew, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. It's been an absolutely amazing Q&A.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Mike. And Pete, I'll drop you a line. See you, mate. Cheers, Mike.
Cheers.